listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care Vigor, a podcast where we explore what it's like getting older, the peaks, the valleys, and everything in between. In this season of Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care Vigor, we're covering topics related to vibrant aging. I'm your host, Cheryl Praska. Let's grow old together. On today's episode, I'm joined by Felicia Greenfield, who is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist in private practice at Felicia Greenfield Therapy and Consultation, LLC, where she specializes in helping adults navigate age-related challenges, counseling caregivers, and supporting grieving individuals. Prior to starting her private practice, Felicia spent nearly 20 years at the Penn Memory Center, which is a unit of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the University of Pennsylvania. As the executive director of Penn Memory Center, Felicia led an interdisciplinary team of social workers and clinical support staff, developed a comprehensive care program for the center, created a suite of programs, and secured millions of dollars in funding. Felicia, welcome, and thank you for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Cheryl. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, Felicia, you're joining me today to talk about dealing with age-related transitions, the caregiving experience, grief, and loss. To start, can you share a bit about your professional background?
Sure. My background is in education and social work. I began my career teaching English to middle school students. My experience in the classroom exposed me firsthand to how racism, poverty, and other experiences that people in marginalized communities go through negatively affects kids' abilities to learn. Through my experience, I became interested in learning more about how to support the whole person beyond the classroom. I decided to leave teaching to pursue a master's in social work, but I intended to go back and return to working in schools with children and youth. Anyway, I moved to Philadelphia and took a job at Penn as a research coordinator and eventually enrolled as a part-time student in Penn's School of Social Work program. I was working as a research administrator at the Penn Memory Center while I was finishing up grad school. And like I said, I intended to leave and go on working with youth. So I had the good fortune to be offered the opportunity to create a social work and counseling program at the Penn Memory Center. Of course, I accepted it, and it was there that I developed the expertise that I bring to my work today.
It's so interesting for me to hear that you went from childhood education into working with older adults. I have a somewhat similar experience where I started my career with tutoring inner city students, and now I work in marketing and with seniors. It's just interesting that our tracks were somewhat similar as far as the going from youth to
Right.
older adults.
Right. I agree. Yeah. To me, it was, as I was getting older, I was maybe becoming more separated from the experiences of the students. And it seemed like a natural transition to me and one that I enjoyed very much.
So, what are some of the key takeaways from your experience, so your 20 years of experience at Penn Memory Center and working with probably hundreds of caregivers?
Yeah, I know. I learned so much from my time at the Penn Memory Center. If I had to summarize some key takeaways, I think I'd begin by saying I learned how scary it can be for people to go to a place like a memory center for a diagnostic workup. It's not like going to a doctor for some other kind of physical condition. The implications are much more personal. People are defined by their minds. The fear of developing dementia is so prevalent because it could represent so many losses, including loss of memory, loss of independence, and loss of self, actually. I also learned that a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease doesn't only affect the person experiencing the symptoms, it's an illness that changes the entire family system. I realize that there are a lot of misconceptions around neurodegenerative illnesses, along with a lack of education and resources to support families living with dementia. I also learned about lifestyle changes that promote a healthy aging brain, and I learned best practices for supporting older adults, people living with dementia, and their caregivers. The program I developed almost 2 decades ago was informed by all of this learning and aims to make a visit to the Memory Center a little easier. Families are met with understanding and empathy, and they have access to an interdisciplinary team of professionals who understand them and what they're going through. And they have folks who come to the center have access to high quality information, counseling, and a variety of social programs designed to be accessible, educational, social, and uplifting.
So then, how did you decide to transition into your private practice?
It was a really hard decision. Um, I think that the simplest answer boils down to readiness.
Hmm.
As I said, I learned so much. I gained so much expertise in my 20 years there. When I developed the social work program, I was a team of one. By the time I left, I led a team of 5 people to do the work and had trained upwards of 50 interns. I raised enough money to sustain the program moving forward, and I just felt ready for my next challenge. So earlier this year, I took the very scary leap to leave Penn and enter into this venture as a private practitioner.
So, in your private practice, what is your approach to therapy?
Oh, I use an eclectic approach,
Hmm.
drawing on different modalities depending on why the client is seeking therapy at that time. I do work with individuals, couples, and families. And I start with an assessment. I really want to learn about who this person is, what they're hoping to get out of the process of engaging in therapy, and what their goals are. And because the relationship between the client and the therapist is critical to the entire process, I strive to establish a positive rapport with my clients. Then I tend to incorporate elements of psychodynamic theory, family systems theory, psychoeducation, mindfulness, and evidence based approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. And because loss is inherent in aging and life transitions, I always keep this in mind and I incorporate elements of grief processing into my work as well.
What are some of the age related transitions you help your clients navigate?
Yeah, so in family systems theory, there's a model that's used called the family life cycle model. And I tend to keep this in the
Hmm.
back of my mind as a framework as I consider the different stages people are going through in their lives. Transitions can be exciting, but they can also be scary and bring challenges. So, for example, becoming an adult and establishing independence, we grow up in a family, right? We grow up, we're teenagers. Eventually, if we're lucky enough, we grow to adulthood, we establish independence, we go to college, perhaps. We might choose to marry, and if we do, we enter a new family. We have to negotiate what it's like to have in-laws, right? Some people choose to have children. So some people are bringing new children into the family and raising these children to become adolescents. Each of these are transitional stages. Um, if we do have adolescents, they then get ready to launch and repeat the life cycle. Um, and all of these are life events that eventually lead to late life or age-related transitions. So keeping in mind that there can be an element of loss involved in every stage of the life cycle, aging tends to involve changes that can be stressful or emotionally painful because they can make people feel like they're losing independence or even identity. So I help clients navigate all kinds of changes, including adjusting to retirement, living with a new illness or chronic pain, and becoming caregivers. I also support people who are grieving the loss of a spouse, another family member, or a friend. Sometimes people are faced with needing to make a decision about moving or downsizing. These types of transitions can be difficult because they require a person to rethink who they are and perhaps identify new sources of meaning and purpose in their lives.
And something that came up for me when you were running through all of that was so much of the beginning of life was like you're adding education, you're adding a career, adding a spouse, adding a child. And then for me, it sounds like you start losing things. You're like you retire from a job, so you lose a career in a sense. If you have children, they move away, they go to college. So that just that shift in getting older, the the change and the transitions are just predispositioned than the ones in your youth.
Absolutely. And that's a really it's a hard adjustment when you think about it from a family life cycle because
Mhm.
we will all eventually, if we're lucky enough to live that long, become that person, right? But then we are all inevitably going to have to come to terms with what it means to kind of shift your position in the family and experience new challenges and losses. Good.
Mm. So in your private practice, you mentioned that you work with individuals who are dealing with serious medical diagnosis. This can include cognitive impairment as well as those individuals' caregivers. What can you share about the relationship dynamics of these situations?
Yes, I do work with people experiencing changes in their memory and thinking, as well as their caregivers. Sometimes I work with the individuals with memory loss on their own, individually, and
Hmm.
sometimes I work with them with their caregivers in the room. And sometimes I work just with caregivers. Okay, so it looks different depending on who's in the room with me. But when one person in a marriage or partnership is diagnosed with cognitive impairment or dementia, they're kind of forced to rely on their spouse, partner, or adult children as their illness progresses. And this inherently causes a shift in the dynamics of the relationship, and it changes over the course of the illness. In the beginning, sometimes just short term memory is affected. The person with cognitive impairment needs to develop strategies for compensating for these blips in their memory. They might be helped by learning how to use a calendar or a whiteboard to help them structure their day and to be reminded of what's going on in their schedule that day. Or they may need to lean on a partner to fill in gaps for things they don't remember. As the illness progresses, the impaired partner may need more assistance with completing tasks or even communicating. So the well spouse or the caregiver takes on more of the household responsibilities, planning, and decision making. Sometimes this results in role reversals in some couples or in parent child relationships, and it can lead to resentment on both sides. Also, if left unchecked, dementia is an experience that can lead to social isolation, which we now know can put people at an increased risk for serious health issues. I've been working with couples and families in my practice, facilitating conversations on how the changes that they're going through are affecting each person in the system. And I work with them to improve communication and come up with effective strategies for supporting the person with memory loss in ways that are respectful and dignified.
Would you prefer to age independently in your own home or live in a nursing facility? I know what I'd rather do. Friends Life Care membership offers just that. Plan today for a future lived at home with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience while protecting your savings. Learn about your options at a free seminar or webinar. Register at friendslifecare.org/register or call 215-628-8964. Can you share how you help your clients who are coping with the serious medical diagnoses?
Yeah, I'd say I start by listening, especially when a disease is hidden or not visible. People can feel misunderstood or isolated, even by their families. So I really want to hear their story and how they're experiencing whatever it is they're going through. I try to help the client understand and grieve the losses their diagnosis may impose on them. And when clients are ready, we can work together on finding ways to accept and adjust to their new realities, whatever they may be.
You spoke earlier about the role reversal and having one spouse or partner or child start having adult child start having to take on more of a responsibility. And I'm just thinking about like the compounding factor of that and wondering how you might address caregiver burnout.
Yes. So caregiver burden is defined as the interplay between the physical, emotional, social, and financial aspects of caregiving. Caregiving in general is hard, but caring for a person with dementia is even harder. It can be physically demanding and socially isolating. Friends tend to drop away out of discomfort or fear or just not knowing what to say or do. Dementia caregivers report higher rates of depression and anxiety than other types of caregivers. And also, caring for someone with dementia is expensive. Many people don't realize that in home help, assisted living, or memory care are not covered by Medicare. It's all private pay unless someone had the foresight to secure long term care insurance or a policy like the one offered by Friends Life Care. So, when someone's providing care for a loved one with dementia, they're forced to endure these stressors, which can last upwards of 10 or more years. There was a study done several years ago that asked new caregivers how long they think they'll be caring for someone with dementia. And the answer on average was they thought it was 2 years. But no, it's more likely to be 7, 8, 9, 10, or more years. So when I work with caregivers, I start by educating them about the illness and what to expect as it progresses. And I teach best practices for communicating with a loved one with dementia. I work with caregivers to help them become behavioral detectives so that they can modify the environment to better support the person with dementia if needed. Most importantly, though, I work with caregivers to establish a routine for their own self care. Because of the duration and intensity of being a caregiver, it's imperative that people maintain their own doctor's appointments, that they have an exercise routine, and that they get breaks. They should try to maintain and nurture their friendships, and they can benefit from seeking support from others going through a similar situation. Support groups are great for this. Talking to a counselor and preparing for life after caregiving can also be beneficial. Additionally, Additionally, finding purpose in their caregiving role can help to shift the experience from one that feels daunting to one that feels meaningful. So it's challenging but important to find the positive aspects in caregiving as well. Um, Caregivers, I think, are reminded all too well that if something, happens, if something happens to them, the question becomes who takes care of the person with dementia. So it's not selfish to prioritize one's own self care because of the demands and the duration of dementia caregiving.
And as difficult as it must be a caregiver, even possibly more so can be the end of caregiving and the loss of your loved one. How might you help your clients and guide them through the grief and loss period?
Yeah, many people seek me out to help them process the loss of a loved one they care for. I might sound like a broken record here, but I'll repeat what I said earlier.
Mm.
I listen. I want to know their story and the story of the person that they lost. I want to know what the relationship was like, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I want to hear about their experience. Once I have a sense of who I'm working with and who the person that they lost was and what the relationship was like, I teach about different grief frameworks, and I use creative exercises and interventions like letter writing or writing in general that have been shown to help people process grief. I help them to reflect, to honor the person they lost, and to find meaning in their experience. And eventually, to begin thinking about what's next for them in terms of rebuilding their purpose and identity.
So, thinking about what's next on that theme, what is next for your therapy and consulting practice?
Oh, what's next for me? That's a good question. Um, so I just started in January of this year, and I've been focused on, getting the word out and growing my practice. I'm proud to report that I'm doing pretty well. I have a nice caseload that I'm following regularly. Feel like I'm doing good work. Um, so when I think about the future, I think I'd like to begin to offer therapy groups or classes for caregivers and also support groups in the future. I'm also committed to teaching and training the next generation of clinical social workers interested in this work. So I'm thinking about ways to bring trainees into my practice in the coming year as well. It's all very exciting to think about.
It's very exciting for you. And the fact that you did something similar at Penn Memory Center with your staff and the interns and were able to provide such a benefit there, it sounds so generous that you would want to do that again in your own private practice.
It's fun to train people, and I won't be doing this forever, so I feel like we have to bring on people who can do this work and do it well in the future.
So, how can our listeners get in touch with you to learn more about your services?
People can visit my website. It's FeliciaGreenfieldTherapy.com. I have a lot of information about who I am, my experience, and I also have a robust FAQ page that should answer most questions folks might have. And I have a way for people to contact me through my website as well. I offer a free 15-minute consultation to answer questions and to see if we might be a good match.
So, are there any final thoughts that you would like to impart on our listeners?
I'll keep it simple and general. Stay hydrated, be kind, and take care of one another.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I learned a lot and I appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to talk to you today, Cheryl.
Thank you for listening to Honestly Aging by Friends Life Care Vigor, a unique program focused on aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience. You can find links and show notes from this episode on our website at friendslifecare.org/podcast. Thank you to Felicia Greenfield for joining us today. You can learn more about Felicia and the services she offers by visiting FeliciaGreenfieldTherapy.com and LinkedIn. If you like our show, please rate, review, subscribe, and join us next time. To learn more about aging with vitality, independence, growth, and resilience, subscribe to our blog at friendslifecare.org/blog.